Welcome to 18th Century Cooking. I'm your host, John Townsend. Today we'll be using an ingredient we have never used before on the channel, artichokes. Thanks for joining us as we savor the flavors and the aromas of the 18th century. Artichokes show up in a lot of different recipe books, English recipe books from the 18th century. A lot of these recipes are very, very similar. This one's mostly based on the recipe here in Hannah Glass's cookbook, the Art of Cookery. This one really is sort of the staple. If you're only going to get one 18th century cookbook, this is probably the one to get. This recipe is pretty simple. Except it really doesn't tell you what to do with the artichokes. So that's where we're gonna start. Let me read to you her recipe. This one's really easy in the recipe, at least, not necessarily in the doing. To fry artichokes. First, blanch them in water, then flour them, fry them in fresh butter, lay them in your dish, pour melted butter over them, or you may put in a little red wine into the butter and season with nutmeg, pepper, and salt. So right, super simple, but it's not that simple. Because what really happens is, the hard part is what happens before you do anything in this recipe. You can't just take this artichoke and do exactly what she says and turn out with anything very edible, because the inside of the artichoke is like a little hairball. It's the choke of the artichoke. We got to take that out. And these outer leaves, if you try to eat them, it's like trying to eat rope. So let's prepare these. Let's get these cut down to what we can actually work with. So let's start to prepare these artichokes. We need to get them sort of cut up and get the external layer off of here. Now, before I start cutting this, one of the tricks with artichokes is the fact that when you cut them, if you let them set in the open air, they start to turn black and do strange color things. So to keep them from doing that, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to do it completely, but we're going to have a bath of water and a lemon. We're going to squeeze a little lemon juice in there so that protects them from discoloring too much. So let's squeeze a lemon in there. Let's cut off the very end of the stem. You don't want to cut off all the stem because there's good stuff inside the stem, but we'll cut off the last ½ inch on this one. And let's get rid of these excess leaves that are just easy to get rid of. We can basically cut the very top of this. All the tips of these leaves, some of them have almost like a thorn at the end of them. We want to get rid of the tips of all the leaves. So let's just cut off the first inch here. Okay, so you can already see, because I'm using a non-stainless steel knife, it starts to turn color here. So we get this sort of black color. I'm not going to be able to do too much about that. 18th century knives were carbon steel, and carbon steel reacts with the chemicals inside of this. But we can see that we've gotten rid of most of this outside. We can also just sort of cut away these outer leaves. Let me dunk this to keep it from discoloring. We're trying to get down to these nice yellow leaves. Now let's make sure to get the very outer skin off of this stem. So we don't want that, but we do want what's inside the stem. So this sort of fibrous exterior, we're going to take off. So these are all ready, they're all trimmed up. It's time to put them in boiling water. The Hannah Glass recipe says to just blanch them, and blanch them just means put them in the boiling water for a very short period of time. I've got a different recipe book here. This is Richard Briggs in the Art of English Cookery, and this one, it's a little bit later recipe, and he goes into a little bit more explanation about artichokes. And in this one, he says boil them till they're tender. There's definitely more than just blanching going on with this particular recipe, and I'm going to go ahead and let these boil for a little bit. I'm not sure how long it takes to get them to be tender. I've never really worked that much with artichokes, especially this kind of recipe before. So I'm going to let these boil for 15 or 20 minutes. And some recipes, I think, even call for boiling an hour, hour and a half. Not necessarily for frying them, but you know, I think I'm pretty safe in letting them boil for a little bit of time before we cut these up. The ones I've eaten before, they can be pretty tough, so I'm gonna let them get tender. And this can be some of the fun of interpreting these recipes. You gotta look at a bunch of different recipes, figure out what's going on, what can go wrong, and it may take 3 or 4 or 5 tries at a recipe like this before you get it like you really want it. These are really made as suggestions. They are not complete directions, so you learn as you go. Now that these are out of the water, let's go ahead and cut them in half. And they're definitely softer. Once we get them cut in half, we've got this final little part that we have to do. We're gonna cut them in quarters also, but we need to cut the choke out. And let's look at the inside here. Now that we've got this cut in half, we can see this hairy part in here. Now this may not taste bad, but it's got a texture that we don't like. Sort of like the outside might not taste bad, but it's got a texture like rope. This section's like a little hairball in there, and we're gonna cut this out. But we don't wanna cut too far down into the flesh underneath that, because that's some of the very best part of the artichoke. So we're just gonna very carefully cut all these little hair sections out. Now we want these to dry off, so I'm going to take my quarters. Because we're going to be frying them, we don't want too much moisture there. I'm going to take these guys, set them on here, get them to dry off a little bit. Let's set these aside. Now let's make the flour that we're going to dredge these in, and then we can start to fry them. Just got some unbleached flour, got some salt and pepper. Just gonna add that. Some just black pepper. I like pepper, so we're gonna put a lot of that in there. Final ingredient, I'm gonna put nutmeg in here. I know you think it's a joke, but it's not. Briggs's recipe definitely puts nutmeg on top of these guys, and he puts these spices inside the flour. Some of them put the spices on afterwards. We're gonna put these spices right here in our flouring, so when we fry it, it fries the flavor right in. Our artichokes are ready. They've been fried up nice and brown, which is what the directions called for. I'm not sure how to eat these or what utensil to use, so I think I'm just gonna go ahead and pick them up to try them. And I just know from experience that this very outside edge probably isn't the best part. So we'll just take a chunk out of the middle here. Leave behind those very outside leaves. That was a big bite. Really, really good. It kind of reminds me this time of year. This is the time of year we go out and we hunt morel mushrooms, fry them up just like this. Well, it reminds me of that. They've got a wonderful sweet flavor to them. And we can eat, basically the stem is all good once we skin that. And especially this base is some of the very, very best part of it. So good, so good. Who would have thought? These weird, they're actually related to thistles. So who would have guessed that you could go out and fry up these thistles, giant thistle heads, in butter? They taste great. If you get a chance to try something like this, you will definitely enjoy it. Such a wonderful recipe. Again, if you're interested, The Art of Cookery by Hannah Glass, you can find that on our website. And if you're interested in other similar videos, check out this herring and greens video. So good.